never tells me preparing. Okay. I think we're live. This happened last time where I talked for like 5 minutes and we were actually live. Well, welcome everyone to the third installment of the nonprofit Social Media Nerds. What's the next normal for nonprofits in a post-pandemic world? And what's interesting is when I wrote that title, I really thought we might live in a post-pandemic world, but now I'm not so sure. I think we're going to live in a pandemic adjacent world for a very long time to come. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that post-pandemic. A lot of people are using it, or the new normal. I don't know. I don't know what term is appropriate to use, but thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have 4 of really the most amazing people on this Facebook Live. We're going to talk, we're going to ask questions, or we're going to get questions answered. And the topic it's a really big one. So I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of discussion. What is the next normal, or what are we seeing? What's happening? What are we projecting for the nonprofit workforce and for volunteering, which both of them could probably be like a 7-hour topic. So I want to welcome my guests. I'm going to let them, after I do brief introductions, introduce themselves and talk about what they've been seeing and what they've been experiencing. So I would like to introduce first Calliope Glaros. She's the principal consultant at Philanthropy Without Borders, and she does a lot of webinars like me with Charity How To, and they're awesome. So she does a lot of free ones as well. There's Leah Hoang, Director of Human Resources and Operations at Generations Incorporated in Boston. Cherian Koshy at Des Moines Performing Arts in Iowa. And Kurtlan Massarsky, who's actually a good friend of mine, Director of Development and Marketing at Bagley, the Boston Alliance of LGBTQ plus youth. So welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to have you. It's so nice to chat a little bit. And of course, we have Josh Hirsch, my co-host, Director of Mission and Communication at Susan G. Komen, Florida. So actually, I want to do this. I'll probably just do it in alphabetical order. So Calliope, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Calliope Glaros. I work as a consultant, and so I see things in a little bit of a different way than those who are working within a nonprofit. Prior to the pandemic, a lot of my work was with international NGOs and really helping to connect their supporters that are dispersed all over the United States and all over the world to the work that is happening in various places around the world. And so I was doing a lot of what we call donor trips, actually bringing donors to the site, and also facilitating international volunteer programs. Since the pandemic, of course, like none of that is happening, right? We're not having any donors travel, at least all through 2020. We're also not having any volunteer programs, right? Not in conjunction with universities, not volunteers traveling on their own. All of that has come to a halt, but the incredible transformation that we're seeing now is this pivot to virtual experiences. And so organizations where virtual's been on the back burner for a long time and they've thought, our in-person program is so incredible, like we can never take this to a virtual format, are now really rethinking that and have made very fast pivots to provide virtual experiences for their supporters and their volunteers. And I think that's here to stay for the most part, even when travel resumes. But it's still evolving, right? The planning horizon that was a year out is now like 3 months out. So, it's all still very fluid.
Great, thank you. What have you been seeing, Leah?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's very similar to what Calliope just shared. We at Generations Incorporated, we exist to address the literacy crisis within the greater Boston and Revere areas. And so our volunteer corps, who primarily consists of older adults, so 50 plus is really our age range. They serve in our Boston Public Schools and Revere Public Schools settings. And since pre-pandemic, I guess you can say, they were going into schools, providing supplemental literacy support for teachers, really doing like pull-out sessions with students. We also have a one-to-one program in some after-school programs where volunteers would have one-to-one sessions with children at the after school clubs. And then since COVID kind of happened, really, given that our population was a high risk population, we decided to suspend our programming for the remainder of the year. And that really affected our volunteers are very community based. They loved going into the schools, into the sites, and really having that connection with children, and asking them to kind of stop that in sort of keeping in mind their health and really making sure that we were providing a safe environment for our volunteers was forefront in our minds. Since then, a lot of discussion on sort of how do we keep our volunteers engaged in a time when people are physically distancing, especially for a population who's prone to isolation, who's prone to feeling alone, who may not have people or a support system to be able to make sure that they're safe, that they're healthy, or that they need to go get medical help if necessary. So that really became a shift for us in the sort of when we had our stay at home order, and became really the primary focus for our organization, just ensuring that our volunteers were remaining safe, and if they needed support, how could we provide it for them? In terms of our staff, we have a staff that's fairly age diverse. So we have folks who are similar to me, but we also have folks in their encore career who also fall in the same category as our volunteers. And so just making sure that they understood what it meant to work remotely, how to help them facilitate sort of Zoom and Google Hangout meetings. So it's really been, in terms of a staff mindset, it's really been sort of a shift for them to understand what it means to work virtually, as opposed to sort of being on the ground and really at the sites having face-to-face with volunteers and partners. And then for our going back to our volunteers, just thinking about how schools are virtually educating and thinking about how our program can shift in a virtual way to be able to support teachers. Especially, we know now that virtual education is a heavy lift for our teachers, and thinking and being cognizant of what is the best way that our volunteer corps can support those, with a focus on literacy and being cognizant that slide is very real and it will be real for the coming months.
Wow. Wow. Yes. And I actually love the work of Generations Incorporated, but I didn't even think about working with an older population and the really distinct challenges that brings with it right now. So Cherian, you work in the performing arts. Can you tell us what's going on? I can't imagine anything good, maybe something good.
Nothing good, Julia, unfortunately. Well, nothing good from a performance perspective, I should say that. But thanks for having me on, Julia and Josh. I really appreciate it. As you mentioned, I do fundraising for the Performing Arts Center here. And unlike other organizations that produce art, we present art. So that means that a lot of our work is touring productions, whether from Broadway or somewhere else in the world. Earlier this year, we had taiko drummers from Japan, or a ballet from Europe or something like that. So because we don't have art here, there's really very little way that we can virtualize the experience. And because of how a lot of the art is contractually limited and there are, rights and permissions and things like that, we can't just stream video like maybe some other organizations can do. So we've been dark since March of middle of March. I don't remember exactly. Corona time, who knows? We've been dark for a while. I am actually in my office. I snuck away because there's no one else here, so easily socially distance. But there are kind of a handful of different challenges that we're facing and that we're seeing. So in addition to working at the Performing Arts Center, I am also a commissioner with the Iowa Commission on Volunteer Service, also named Volunteer Iowa, and we're the state-based CNCS, so are making sure that AmeriCorps grants and those volunteers are reallocated to their appropriate places in the midst of the coronavirus. And then I'm on the board of a number of different local and regional organizations. So we're seeing a wide variety of things, most of which Leah mentioned in terms of acclimating staff to working from home and what that looks like, pretty much the new normal of people being able to work from home. For our volunteers in particular, and as well as our audiences, one of the things that we're hearing is that the performing arts was really their home away from home. That was their community, it was their people. And one of the things that, so we've had an outpouring of support and people just, reaching out and saying, it's so important for us to have the arts in Iowa, and we can't wait to get back in the theater. And to Leah's point, for those people that are older, most of our audiences and donors are over the age of 45. There's a very real element of rural and social isolation that we deal with. And this is an opportunity, has been, BC before Corona, was an opportunity for them to go out and be with their people and hang out and talk about things. So the thing that I'm most proud about with our team is that the very day the governor ordered the theater shut, we switched into what we called Project Joy. And we just started sharing stories of joy in the arts or just in our community that would continue to connect people to one another. And we then started calling all of our donors, and now our volunteers are calling donors as well, and having them curate these joyful stories to tell each other good news, just in the same way that they would do this if they were in our venues, but now they're doing this through social media. As I mentioned, we don't have the ability to virtualize a performance, but we can virtualize the conversation and the connection that we once had. Around the state and indeed around the country, the virtual volunteer experience has become a real need, primarily because volunteers want to do something. People want to help. There is this outpouring of just global philanthropy. And by that, I mean the love of other humans. So I like to say that every measure of social distancing, of wearing a mask, is all a love of someone else. And we're all looking for ways to help one another in this crisis. And so both at our organization at DMPA, we're figuring out unique different ways for volunteers who are age diverse and socioeconomically diverse to be able to engage in whatever way they feel comfortable, but also for volunteers around the state to find ways, whether they're comfortable serving meals or bags of food or whatever, or if they're able to do virtual read to kids kind of things. So lots of different opportunities out there. I'm glad we're having this conversation because I think there's a seismic shift that's going to happen in the sector as a result of this.
I think so too. I'm really excited to talk more about virtual volunteering. So Kurtlan, can you tell us more about your amazing work at Bagley? And you work with youth and maybe some of the different things that you're experiencing right now.
Sure. I'm going to start this the way I would if I were at a youth leadership committee meeting at Bagley. So my name is Kurtlan Massarsky. I use pronouns like he, him, and his. Bagley's Director of Development and Marketing. Usually we would say our age, but I'm not going to do that right now.
You can do that.
I'm 37.
Right.
And I gosh, there's so much to say, and y'all are very tough acts to follow. And Julia and Josh, thank you also for asking me to do this. Working for a social justice oriented community-based organization means that we've been prioritizing, the needs and trying to galvanize resources for, communities within communities, sort of, the Russian nesting doll sense of needs and stuff like that. And Bagley prioritizes, of course, LGBTQ plus youth. And then, but within that, really committing ourselves to recognizing and assessing intersectionality and the ways that, no one is just one thing. And so, many young people in our communities and specifically the young people we serve are experiencing vulnerability on multiple levels of who they are. And so we prioritize LGBTQ plus youth of color, homeless or young people experiencing homelessness or unstable housing, and trans and non-binary young people. And another thing, I think it's important to remember, our name is a misnomer because we're a statewide organization that's based in Boston, but we are supporting an entire network of independent LGBTQ plus youth organizations across the state and disperse funding to those network affiliates and technical assistance. So we're trying to use that as an opportunity to really understand the landscape, to constantly source what the most immediate needs are of the young people that we're serving, and then of course respond to them. You know, it sounds like we were in a similar position to many other people, and then the people we're on this chat with. We made the decision to close our community center on a Monday, and by Wednesday we were providing virtual programming. I think it is one of the benefits of being a smaller nonprofit, as far as, you've just got all those people wearing all the different hats, and we kind of took a deep breath and said, we'll have to figure it out as we go. And I believe that Bagley has matched that with some longer term thinking as well, not just about the structure of how employees and staff and volunteers will show up, but of course, how we can be at the forefront of innovative thinking to serve our communities and serve our populations. And some of that is also in the middle. So we were able to very quickly launch a direct aid initiative that provides material support to young LGBT people. Actually, it's been across the country. I think we were a little hampered by our own talking points. And I remember when the first application came in from Idaho, I was like, oh, right, of course. Mm-hmm. And so I think direct aid is going to, not just because the impacts of the pandemic are going to be long lasting, and there have already been so many twists that, we're not really counting on anything, any return to anything that didn't work really, that we just managed before. Mm-hmm. And so clearly the economic instability was there all the time. We knew that, and we were addressing it in different ways. And I think that this was the push that we needed to just say, you know what, people just need material relief. Why aren't we just, within the means of our resources, why aren't we doing that? And we've had hundreds of applications and have dispersed, we've approved over 50% of the applications that have come in through that. And for Bagley have dispersed a significant amount of funding towards that so far. So I've been glad to see that. And I also know that will continue even as things shift and change, and we're able to come back together in whatever ways are ethical or safe to do so. Mm-hmm. And then it's really this chance to reassess what works and what we were just doing because it's what we've done for 40 mm-hmm. years. As one of the oldest LGBT organizations in the country, let alone being a youth-led, adult-supported organization. There are things that we've just always done, and we're still doing them, and we're also recognizing that some of them were due for a shakeup, and I think that's provided an opportunity to do that. And we're being very thoughtful and intentional about how and when, as I said, we'll show back up in person. We're aware of the critical need. I don't think, it's the opposite of writing a grant when you're like, all you want to write is, oh, come on, we do good work. Yeah. So it's thankfully a given that being in person again is going to feel amazing, and that the community building and networking and relationship building just happens differently when we are sitting with one another. And so that's just a blanket understanding. It's foundational, which is great. And we also don't want to let this opportunity go by without recognizing, okay, and now actually we're seeing, folks from more rural or quieter areas of the state show up to our identity support group meetings, or we had just, I think like a month prior, launched our first disability inclusion group meeting. And shockingly, it is easier for people with mobility concerns to attend a virtual meeting, right? And so we're actually seeing that particular identity group thrive in the current circumstances. So, there's just so much learning to be done. I'm not a silver lining kind of person. I am not part of the productivity cult, and telling people that they have to look on the bright side or find the strengths or whatever, but that has been true for us. And anyone listening probably knows the average tenure for a director of development isn't very long in most nonprofits. I'm going on my 10th year at Bagley.
Yay!
And I feel absolutely renewed by some of the creativity and innovation that we've brought to the forefront. So that's the beginning of my story.
Amazing. Kurtlan, I want you to write a blog post. I want you to write about that. I think that's hugely important. I mean, the point of let's see what we've been doing for 40 years and let's shake it up. And a lot of us have only shaken it up because we had to, we were forced to,
Right.
But what do we want to take with us? And I don't know if Kurtlan, if it was you that sent me that amazing Medium post that everyone's read, beware of the gaslighting. It's probably you. So
I know.
Yeah.
I read it. Yeah.
But I thought that it brought up some interesting points that all of you have been talking about, really the way we've been forced to deal with this, but then what do we want to bring forward? So I have another question. I don't know if Josh, if you wanted to add anything to what you're seeing and with volunteers at Komen.
Yeah, I mean, we're still actively meeting with our volunteers right now, with our seasonal flux. Starting to ramp up our race committee, and as you can imagine, everyone is anxious, as we're all hearing, is that they want to be able to do something. And right now, especially when you're talking about a population that is immunocompromised, it is difficult for us all to get together and have that. What's so key about Komen and organizations like ours is that sense of family, that sense of community that we can build, especially through volunteers, especially through events. And not able to have that now is more difficult. But using meetings like this via Zoom is really allowing those individuals to come back together.
Okay, so I know and Calliope has to go because it's Calliope.
10 Calliope, yeah.
Calliope, okay.
I got like 12 more minutes.
Okay. Well, no, I know. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
That I asked you this question. So there are two questions came in the Facebook group, but they were kind of tied into something I wanted to talk about. So Kristen asked, I'm curious how people are using volunteers now. And then Lisa says, my question is about how we all might be using volunteers in the future. So I think they're tied together because I think now is kind of the future and we can't see the future, and everything changes hour to hour, day to day, state to state, county to county. So all of us are in different locations, so we might have different answers. I mean, I've been talking to a group that I work with in Wisconsin, and they're completely thrown for a loop right now because they're forced to open and they don't necessarily want to, or they don't have a plan. They don't know like what they're going to do, and they don't know how they're going to talk to their volunteers. So I'm wondering, because I know that Calliope, you deal with a lot of different clients and you work with a lot of pretty diverse groups. I'm wondering what you're seeing and maybe what your thoughts are, what some tips are for how you're telling your clients to go forward.
Right, absolutely. So most in-person volunteer experiences are off the table right now for a number of reasons. Broadly, where we're seeing the shifts are in terms of virtual volunteering, like what are these volunteers doing? It's mostly administrative work and also work that supports fundraising, right? So like Cherian was saying in his example, calling up donors and asking for stories that can be shared. You have volunteers writing stories, helping out with social media feeds, helping do, sort of peer-to-peer types of fundraising initiatives. Of course, a lot of administrative things. Not all of us nonprofits have a lot of administrative needs. And so those are some of the shifts that we're seeing. And, what I'm telling organizations too is like when they're pivoting to virtual, like you probably have some volunteers that know your programs really well and they also are virtually savvy. So see how much you can lean on them to like create a virtual volunteer orientation or, provide content for some of your feeds. What I do want to say though, also with kind of the sort of next shift in the trap and stuff to watch out for is people treating their volunteers like a virtual assistant. So I think what's here to stay broadly is this is a relationship-based industry, right? So whether it's fundraising or volunteering or collaborating with other nonprofits, like this is our work is about relationships. And so what I see some organizations do, even if they don't know it, is they're like, I'm so busy, I've got to write this report or I've got to mine this data, send it to the volunteer with, the task list, and then like forget about it, right? And then just hope that it comes in at the deadline and great and thank you, right? And that's not how we're going to retain volunteers in the long term. And so they still want this sense of community. And I know it's hard, especially if you're a small nonprofit, to be following up with your volunteers and calling them and offering them all these opportunities. If you have tons of volunteers, it's so hard to do. But host like virtual happy hours or virtual networking sessions. Find ways that you can continue to invite your volunteers to see the impact of what their support is. Because when they're doing virtual stuff and just mining through data, it's hard to see the forest through the trees, right? And so show them how that little project is contributing to something larger, introduce them to each other virtually, and provide these opportunities for them to connect, because it is lonely and isolating work. And if we just send it to them and are like, it's going to get done and I don't have to worry about it now, that project might get done, but we'll see retention really dip in the long term.
That's so important, not to treat volunteers like virtual assistants. I had never even thought of that. That's really interesting. That's awesome. But I also wanted to ask Leah, like from your perspective, you're the director of HR and operations. How has, what do you see as the future? Do you see us working at home? Do you see more virtual and more flex time? Do you see virtual volunteering really taking off? And I know that, you and I are both in Boston, and we're in a very liberal place, but a pretty conservative place in terms of opening up again. And I know we don't have a crystal ball, so I hate to put you on the spot a little bit, but what do you think is going to happen in the future, and what are you planning for?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's certainly something as sort of our leadership team at the organization, as well as just the staff in general, are starting to ask those same questions. I think we definitely recognize that the pandemic has really forced us to be open to working virtually, working remotely, being flexible about people's work schedules. And I don't think that that's going to change post-pandemic. If anything, I think it will be kind of an expectation or requirement for a lot of workplaces to really think about providing flexibility to their staff in terms of what their expectations of office presence will be, particularly as we talk about in Boston specifically, knowing that reopening still will have an expectation of physical distancing. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of volunteering, I think, specifically for our volunteer core Generations Incorporated, it's kind of twofold. It's really opened up an opportunity to engage volunteers who wouldn't necessarily be able to be a part of our program because we're, community site based. And so it had required in the past volunteers able to actually go to a site or a school and be there, as opposed to offering a virtual program, which allows volunteers who may not easily be able to get to the communities that we serve to be engaged in a virtual way. I mean, we've already had people express interest through us, reach out and say, we'd love to, take part in virtual programming. And so I think that is a really exciting thing for us to be able to engage those people in a new way. But I think on the flip side of that, and something to be cognizant of, is sort of access in terms of, internet access and internet reliability. Technology access is a huge sort of question and area of opportunity, I think, for everyone, particularly in our sector, to be cognizant of, is when we're asking and expecting virtual presence, it does require a basic knowledge of how to use technology, but also a basic ability to even get on the internet, to have a Zoom meeting without worrying about a dropped call or questionable audio. And so those are all conversations that we've had with our volunteer core to understand, like, a lot of them don't have reliable internet access, but they have a phone that they can attend and be engaged with. But when we're having virtual programming, is that still something that they'll be able to remain engaged in our program with? So those are questions that we're facing at the moment.
I love that. Okay, that leads me to go kind of off script because I want to hear what everyone else has to say. I want to hear, Cherian, what do you think are the pitfalls and the challenges that we're going to have to navigate, and the obstacles going forward? Because that's a really fantastic one. That's one, I mean, I would have thought maybe, but I think that there's so much that we assume, and just, I think, to lead without assumptions, but I would love to hear from other people. What are some of the pitfalls you think we should be avoiding?
So I think in general, nonprofits have many times, as Kurtlan mentioned, put these boxes around what we've always done and how we've always operated. And now is the time to throw out the box and to really reconfigure what it looks like to volunteer, what it looks like to deliver the programs that we have delivered in the past. There are obviously certain limitations in terms of programmatic quality or programmatic effect that are important guidelines because we want to make sure that we're doing right by our beneficiaries. But a lot of times we have said, one thing that we talked about before when I would do service enterprise training with nonprofits is, what are roles that can't be done by a volunteer? And you would have nonprofits that come up with lists of, well, we can't have them do this, we can't have them do that. And then you start to critically interrogate that and you're like, actually, there are quite a lot of organizations that are completely volunteer run. So there's a volunteer ED, there's a volunteer finance person, there's a volunteer fill in the blank. So what are things that volunteers could do? Pretty much everything. And it really comes down to, as Leah mentioned really appropriately, there are limitations when it comes to technology that maybe virtual volunteering is not what we need to be thinking through. It's more of remote management or remote oversight, if you will, of volunteer activities. So there are still kind of offline activities that volunteers can do that don't require a computer, and for those people that don't have access to reliable technology or can't afford it or something like that, this is going to be an important feature of what that looks like. So I think, just to expand upon what everyone has said so far, the biggest challenge, I think, is it's not just work from home, it's work differently, it's work it's how the entire ecosystem is going to change, and our partnership with volunteers is going to be very, very different moving forward, where they're a key element of service delivery, not just this is a job we don't want to do, but what does this look like in a way that's meaningful to them and appropriate for moving the organization forward. So just one or two examples of things that we're doing. We had a core before Corona that we called encouragers, and their job was the volunteer job description was to write notes to donors, or to go on social media if they're already on social media and share things or comment on them, to tell their own stories of why they volunteer for the organization, but also to be content creators, to interview people about why they support the arts, why they send their kids to summer camp, all of those types of things. So there are many people that have different qualifications that can be beneficial to the mission of the organization, that might just involve a paper and a pen.
I absolutely love that idea. I think you're right. I mean, we're all learning, we're all adapting. Josh hates the word pivot because I don't know if we're like pivoting. I feel like pivot is very extreme. Like you're totally changing what you're doing. We're more just kind of swimming along and trying to figure out how we're changing what we're doing the best that we can. And because we're being forced to do it. So
I have to jump
yeah.
off real quick, Julia, but I want to say thank you, Cherian.
Thank
and something
you.
One quick thing I want to add, and then
Yes.
I'm sorry, I almost
Yep. No, don't worry about it. I was going to bring it to you.
But what you were saying, one thing I'm telling all my clients now, and I want every listener to remember it, the data from pre-coronavirus is not relevant anymore. We're a very data-driven kind of industry. you're testing a hypothesis. So when organizations ask me, like, if we do a virtual gala, are we going to raise as much? I don't know. Well, if one organization did one and they raise more, will we raise more? I don't know, right? No one knows. And so just remember, remember for your own self, and also when you go to your leadership and they say, what can we expect in terms of engagement and revenue and all these metrics we're used to, we're testing a hypothesis. That's it. And the goal of testing a hypothesis is to determine if it was correct or not. That's it. So with all of these new initiatives, just kind of keep that lens in mind.
Yes.
That's all.
Yes. I love it. Yay. Mic drop.
Yay. Oh,
Take care,
thank you, everyone. Sorry, I
baby.
can't stay on for the full
That's
one.
okay. Thank you
Getting
for
back to the
joining
kiddo.
us.
Thank you, everyone. So great meeting you.
So great to meet you too. I love the map in the background.
Yeah. All right, take care.
Bye.
Hi.
I would 100% reiterate that, because the challenge now of being a consultant is that you have past results, but nothing is for sure right now. And you also have, a budget that you worked with last year, or an annual report that you worked with last year. And absolutely everything, I think, has been thrown out the window. So
And
Kurtlan, I want to ask you, sorry. Does everyone want to add something?
I was just going to comment, Julia, that what you said before is also really important, that every context is different. So every organization is different. Every county is different, state. And so no data means anything anymore, because we're all hypo-testing in very widely different contexts.
I completely agree. And I actually was running an online course in the middle of it, and I had to change everything because one of the pieces is metrics and measurement. And I talk about some of the benchmarks that you can go to, and I talk about some of the studies, the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, or M&R benchmarks, or Blackbaud, and now everything is honestly kind of thrown up in the air. So while I think that's kind of freeing in a way, but for people that really need to know, like, what is going to happen tomorrow, what can I base this on, what have other organizations done, it's very challenging. So, okay, well, Kurtlan, I wanted to ask you, because I know you're going to have a great answer. What, in terms of, the workforce, in terms of volunteering, what are some things that have changed that you hope are going to permanently change?
Oh, well,
or that we'll learn from.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes to, what has already been at least referenced, in that, flexibility and creativity around, what can make someone effective, whether they're a paid staff person or they're a volunteer. All of this is going to be back under the microscope, and all of this is going to be up for reinterpretation. I do think that's actually, in many areas, has historically been a strength for Bagley, but actually not in this one. We were very much in this, like, you are in person, and and that it does speak to some extent to our values and the work that we do, but also, there will be a forced reevaluation now, which I think is good. And I mean, at least for the foreseeable future, for specific to the development and marketing team, there's been a great deal of talking about, making sure we're not making decisions based on appearances or perception, like really what's going to encourage the team to do its best work on behalf of our mission and on behalf of our values. And so I feel very fortunate to be at an organization that prioritizes that. Realize that's not everybody's position, but we certainly haven't worked out the particulars or the logistics. But yeah, I think it's going to be a very long time before we see like a normal 9 to 5 in the office kind of deal, especially because so much of our work was that which could be translated has been, and has actually, we've seen an increase in many metrics, which we just discussed, don't mean so much, or we don't know what they mean as much as we might have a year ago. So I see a general openness, to reinvestigation and being able and more comfortable with, saying, okay, this is how it is for 2 more weeks, and then we will reassess after 2 weeks, which works for my particular personality. I'm okay with that. Other people I know take far more comfort in a bit more structure or rigidity. and we're all gonna, work on that. I will say one of the benefits that I intend to the best of my ability, although it will be open for reinterpretation, is that my team has, without fail, met every morning at 9:30 on a Google Hangout.
Aw.
And we do a today and yesterday. What did yesterday look like? What does today look like? Of course, we do the personal check-ins. How is everyone doing? And
Because that changes hour to hour too.
yeah, it does, absolutely. About week 3026 of quarantine, I checked in and said, so is this helpful? I knew how I felt, and I felt very positive about it. And I try not to project that onto my team just because I feel good about something means that, it doesn't mean that they do. And so I was really prepared to have my heart broken a little bit. And they were like, no, we're sick of seeing you at 9:30 every morning. But everyone said, this has actually been something we'd love to keep this up. We want, and find some way that maybe this can be worked into just what our protocol is going forward. And I have seen with particular staff people how that has absolutely helped them blossom on developing new skills, and both hard skills and soft skills, as far as and I think it has also helped take themselves and their work more seriously in a time where, it's so easy to get lost in a binge watch of whatever you're binging or, cooking or raising
Or drinking.
children or drinking. And so really, with the exception of 2 sick days, which everyone has shown up at 9:30, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Well, not always bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but there and ready to engage. I think that's really wonderful.
I love that.
And I feel like there was, if my brain doesn't decide to function, I'll pass it back off to you. But there was something that I kind of want. Oh, it's just the in regard to volunteer or donor or even stakeholder experience. Something I know that internally I've been very vocal about, but I don't know that I've seen much in the larger conversation is just, are we saying that we know virtual is not the same? Are we acknowledging this?
I don't think we are.
Okay.
Enough.
So can we start it? Because I'm
writing that down.
It's
are we? Yeah.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge that, and some things work better, and some things are just going to fall flat and feel awful and depressing. And frankly, I'm very proud of next week. We have our Massachusetts Youth Pride. We have a ton of digital programming. And I actually think because it's far more focused than a normal Youth Pride would be, because that of course is about the resource fair and the march and the entertainers. And we didn't try and take that template and just force it down Zoom's throat,
yes.
But I'm afraid for June, which is Pride Month, that is what some, regional or local prides are going to try and do. And frankly, I just think I have a pit in my stomach. I think it's going to be boring or messy or both. And I just think we all do ourselves a favor if we're not expecting people to feel as fulfilled by virtual engagement. It is different, and we need to own that and sit with it, and yes, be creative, but also be I guess this isn't just gonna work,
I love that. Just to add to that, I've been seeing a lot of my clients and people asking me, we have a gala in June, can we just make it virtual? I'm like, why? 5-hour gala with speeches? No. No one wants to go to that in person. Let's be real. But Pride events are completely different because they're a celebration of being together and being there and being with people. So I think what you're saying is so important, is that we have to acknowledge that there's something that's lost in some virtual events. And we actually, Josh and I were talking about that, and we were saying, yeah, it's conference season, and we don't have to get on a plane. Yeah. It's, the slog of travel, but there's something to be said, being in a room with 5,000 people, all united around one thing. Really, there is something to be said. So that's a really important point. Thank you. All right. Well, I want to ask one question. I want to ask it to Leah and Cherian, and Josh, if you want to chime in, you can. And I always ask this. What is your one tip? What is your one best piece of advice for someone that's trying to navigate either volunteering or organizing volunteers right now? And they're very stressed and they're very overwhelmed. So Leah, do you want to go first? Like just your one and it could even be like take a nap. That's what I say to people sometimes.
I think, and Kurtlan, I like so respond to a lot of what you just said. So thank you for saying it. And I think with that, something that we've kind of like really been stressing with our staff and trickling down to our volunteers is really recognizing and being honest with yourself of what your boundaries and what your limitations are, and providing yourself the space to be vulnerable in saying, maybe this isn't for me at this time, and that's okay. And I think that is something that we are facing right now with working remotely, is being able to separate our spaces, right? It's this sort of frustration or stress of feeling like you always have to be on, you always have to be present, you always need to be engaged because you don't have a 9 to 5, you're at home. Nobody's doing anything because we're all at home, right? Like, so you're available all the time, but what does that do to you? And recognizing that maybe like if you're feeling tired all the time, it's probably because you're on all the time and you need to be off. And so that is something that has been really important for our staff to just really provide them the space, whether it's a mental health day, whether it is encouraging them to use their PTO, to really just take the time away. You may feel like, well, I'm at home, what am I going to do? But even taking the responsibility away of shutting your computer down, turning your phone off, and really being present for your family or for yourself really does wonders for everybody in coming back and being able to re-engage in a new way. That's what I would say.
Love it. What would you say, Cherian?
So I don't think the self-care element can be overstated. I think it's super important right now. So I would absolutely echo what Leah said. And for what it's worth, hopefully my boss is not listening to this, but if any of my teammates have requested PTO, I've just been like, screw you, I'm not doing that. So you just take the time, and that's not going to be a thing.
Right.
So like, that's not a thing. Anyway.
By not a thing, just clarify, you mean you're not recording it on like a spreadsheet.
Correct. I'm not like taking your PTO away.
Like you had 2 hours of PTO today.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. I'm not, why do I care? Did you get your work done? Did you do some work? Fine, whatever. But I think the challenge that a lot of fundraisers feel right now is, and I think this is true for conscientious people in nonprofits all the time, is they want to do their best. They want to figure out the right thing to do. And there's a worry about like, what if I get it wrong? So what I would say to everybody listening right now is that we need to give ourselves a lot of grace in terms of making mistakes, whether those are actual true mistakes or if they're just decisions that we made to try something out and to see if it works and if it doesn't, because there are no right answers right now. There just aren't. And the thing that you want to realize is that while there are individuals out there who want to give of their time or of their treasure, they're also equally overwhelmed with all of the other things in their life. So they might be at home, but they may not be available. So if you want to reach out to people to see if they're interested, give them a menu of options that are not time bound, that are not that don't have specific requirements, or that there's something that might require a computer, or something that might require a phone, or something that might require pen and paper, but a variety, a buffet, because we're never going to a buffet again. But if my kingdom for an Indian buffet these days, but
oh my God,
right?
buffet.
But my point is that if you can give people a buffet of things that they can select where they feel comfortable, when they feel comfortable, to do what they can when they can, that's the same advice that I would give to you as a fundraiser as I would to a volunteer, is just, give and receive grace as it is provided.
I love it so much. Yay. All right. Well, Josh, do you want to add anything? And then I'm going to send us off because my brain is spinning and I took like 3 pages of notes.
I think we've all heard today that our volunteers are anxious and wanting to help our organizations. We all need to realize what's not only best for our community, but what's also best for where we live and how can we best engage them. Right now might not be the best time, even though that they want to engage with you. Slowly develop a plan, and I'm not going to use the word new because there is no new, it's just the here and now. So develop what it looks like for the here and now, and that here and now might be six months from now, especially if we're talking about arts organizations. How are you going to put 5,000 people into an auditorium to see the taiko drumming? I mean, it's just not the way that things were done. We have to evolve with the times, and don't feel rushed. Whatever is going to come for your organization will come as it's meant to be.
I love it. Thank you all so much for your time. Honestly, I really feel like we could talk for 7 more hours. And maybe we will do some more Facebook Live interviews. I mean, this topic is and this topic changes every day, basically every week. So we should come back together in 6 months and see what's going on. I don't know. Hopefully we're able to get together in person. There's a fantastic article that I sent to you, Josh, that I posted on Facebook, that Dave Grohl wrote for The Atlantic about exactly what you were talking about, Kurtlan, about how you just can't get away from the power of live music or like live performance and seeing it in person. And I would say the same is true really for the workplace, even though I haven't worked with people for 10 years. But that's why I love speaking. And that's why I love going out to see, like going to events. Yeah, I think it's a real thing. So I think that we have to recognize that while the times are different, there are certainly opportunities and certainly challenges, but thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And best of luck. And we will hopefully see you soon. Take care.